broad question on, all of the players and topics we've talked about: Pierre-Luc Dubois, Mark Scheifele, Connor Hellebuyck. Now, so I seemingly hear more about Hellebuyck trade options or people talking about it, frankly, than those other two guys. But you've got your ear to the ground. I mean, is there a team or two that you're sort of focusing in on or hearing anything that might be a suitable trade partner for the Winnipeg Jets? And which players do you think are getting the most traction when Kevin Cheveldayoff is speaking with his counterparts around the league?
Yeah, I mean, Hellebuyck is topical, Huss, because of what's happening with Bob, right? So it's a copycat league. All of a sudden, a $10 million goalie has his team on his back in the Stanley Cup final. So naturally, there will be teams looking around that say, hey, what would an elite goalie do for our organization or for me as a general manager, right? So I think there's obviously teams are always looking at what the areas they can improve in. A lot of the teams that made the Final Four, the teams that made the Elite Eight, whatever you want to call it, they all had places where they could improve. I mean, there's lots of teams that would like to upgrade their goaltending situation. Some of them long term. Some of them might be willing to go to $10 million. Others are looking at Connor at 6.17 and saying, hey, 1 year of Hellebuyck might be enough to get a banner raised. I mentioned Carolina last week just because they have both goalies are on expiring contracts. So to me, that's got to be something that's investigated. The Boston Bruins, I think it's pretty simple, Huss. I think Connor will most likely be going to the Eastern Conference. The Jets will not want to be, they do not want to be haunted by the goalie that went away. I know LA is a team that's getting a lot of love and traction right now. I could see it. It's a potential, but I think it's more likely that it's to me, this was reminiscent of the Laine deal. I know the circumstances are way different, Huss, as a second overall pick compared to a fifth rounder who's blossomed into a Vezina caliber goaltender and a Vezina trophy winner. But I don't think the Jets want to really have Connor Hellebuyck rolling into town 2 or 3 times a year and have him as a potential playoff opponent at any other point other than in the Stanley Cup final.
Would it make sense to take a lesser package, though, to make sure that he goes to
I'm not say if the best offer is from the West, sure, they're going to take the best offer from the West. I mean, I know,
all things being equal, though.
I'm just saying that if they have a comparable offer, this is like the best player available on the draft board. I mean, you can say what you want, but I mean, if the players are equal, you're taking the position of need at the draft, and here you're probably taking a package where you don't feel like you're going to be haunted. This is not a Donovan. Let's just put it this way: it's not a Donovan McNabb situation where the team doing the trading is going to be comfortable with Connor Hellebuyck playing in the division. I'm quite confident of that. But we don't know the factors. We don't know what Connor wants in terms of his next deal. Does he want an 8-year deal? Does he want a $10 million deal? Does he want 5 years? Does he want to play in the States? Does he want to, would he be interested in a 1-year run with the Edmonton Oilers trying to take Connor McDavid over and Leon over the top? I mean, Stuart Skinner had a great year. He's a Calder Trophy candidate. Could they make the money work? We don't know that, but I would say it's much more likely Connor's going to end up, if he is moved, and if he can't come to an agreement with the Jets, who I think will make a very competitive offer, but ultimately it's up to what the player wants. And that's the whole thing. We've talked about this all week long, and we've been talking about it for months, and we will talk about it until the moment a move gets made, if one gets made. It all depends on where Connor Hellebuyck's headspace is at. If he wants to continue to invest in a place where he's invested a lot of sweat equity, in a place where he was drafted in the 5th round and became a star player, or if he we know he's chasing that Stanley Cup. Does he believe he can get that done here in the course of the next contract? That's the only time we're going to know. And only Connor and his representatives know that for sure. But the last little trail of breadcrumbs he left, I wouldn't say a lot of people were confident that his belief level was here. But like I always say to you, Huss, 2 days on the podium after being eliminated, I don't know is necessarily the it's either the place where you get the most truth or you get the most, I can't wait to get the hell off this podium. So I think sometimes we invest a little bit too much in the words, but that's our job. Our job is to interpret the words. So I've been given no indication that Connor has made a decision or if he has decided if he wants to stay or not. And
obviously we're going to be down in Nashville. Should be a very, very exciting week for the entire league, but also specifically for the Winnipeg Jets. Let's assume that nothing happens throughout the Stanley Cup final, as is the norm.
Yeah, it won't happen. There won't be anything happen.
But do you expect that we'll start seeing and hearing some things out of the Winnipeg Jets very quickly at the end of the Cup final? Or is this going to be a waiting game right down to, the days leading into the 28th and 29th when the picks are made? And then, of course, free agency in July is the Saturday of that very week.
Yeah, it's interesting, Huss. I mean, the thing we always, the best indicator of future behavior is past behavior, but that's only to a degree, right? The year that the Jets,
very different now, though.
But I mean, I'm just saying. So the reference point is Jacob Trouba. Like Jacob Trouba was traded on the Monday of the draft that year. He was not traded on the draft floor. Historically, most of these deals get made on the draft floor because, as Kevin Cheveldayoff and his other counterparts have often mentioned, usually a deadline or a time-sensitive situation gets dealt with at a time-sensitive situation. There are always people that, jump the queue and make their deals before the deadline. But in this case, the deadline kind of for the Jets, in order to at least cash in on what looks to be a high-end draft class, would be the NHL draft. Now, it's also possible, Huss, the one thing that we also need to take into consideration, yes, the Jets would like to add another draft pick in the first round probably, or early second, in this draft, which is considered to be incredibly deep. It's also possible that most teams that are offering a package for any of those players that we've been discussing, maybe they're not interested in moving a first-round draft pick in this year. So unless the Jets are willing to go beyond July 1st, or maybe their target is a 2024 first rounder, then we won't see everything happen all at once. But I cannot imagine the Jets go into July 1st without having clarity on where those players stand, unless they don't get offers that move the needle. And if that happens, now you're into a situation where now the game of chicken or the staring contest becomes a little bit more dicey. But I know you've been talking about it with Jeff and others. I don't see the Jets going into the season with the idea that they would trade those players going into the trade deadline if necessary, unless they were holding out hope that they could sign one of those players by showing them and convincing them, hey, they made the playoffs last year. We're in a position to make the playoffs this year. Now, do you want to sign on the dotted line? Maybe there's more clarity on the HRR and maybe the salary cap going up. We can offer you a bit more than we could have in the summer. But to me, we're going to have clarity, Huss, by the time the draft is over, and probably the time before the draft begins. But that's you and I looking into the crystal ball, which remains quite cloudy when it comes to this situation. If it were easy, it would get done easily. But to me, until you have a leverage situation, like right now, the leverage is all with the players, Huss. Every piece of leverage with the players. They are under contract. They are under no obligation to make any decisions about their future unless they want to make those decisions public or to the general manager, or if they are looking for a change of address. And if they are clearly looking for a change of address, or if you're Kevin Cheveldayoff, Huss, and you are making sure that you want a change of address for those players, then your urgency level is on the rise. And it's just hard to imagine a scenario. It's crazy to think that there's a scenario where all three of those guys are not back. But at the same time, it's also easier to envision that scenario now than it would have been 12 months ago for me.
Right.
I mean, it's probably unlikely that all three of those guys, it's probably likely that all three of them will be moved for me. But, now in order to improve, can you move all three and improve the roster? Now that's where it gets dicey.
Like for this season or big picture?
Long term. Yeah. Long term, can you get to a place where, and this is the other part too, that we talk about, like last year when Treleving made the deal, Huss, almost everyone was thinking that the Flames made out like bandits, but people need to look below the surface. I think the Flames made a good deal for the Flames, but the Panthers couldn't afford to pay Huberdeau and Weegar more than what they paid Tkachuk, and they weren't getting both of those players signed for what they gave Tkachuk, even though Tkachuk cashed in at $9.5 million. So it's not a one-for-one swap that you have to be thinking about here. It's about trying to set yourself up with the assets that will take you to a better place, both in the short term and in the long term. And let's be frank, it's going to be hard for Kevin Cheveldayoff to quote unquote win all three trades for your top two centers and your elite level Vezina caliber goaltender. You're probably not bringing back a 40-win goaltender, but you need to provide a level of goaltending that doesn't fall off a cliff for an organization that does not have a guy that's going to be jumping right back into a starting job here. So whether that's a Alexander Georgiev type of player, from another organization. Now, that's part of the challenge, right? And does that player come in free agency? Does he come in a trade? I mean, these are all the Jets have always had factors in terms of trying to build a roster. I'm not sure they've had a bigger challenge in the offseason than what they have in front of themselves right now. And that's compounded by the fact they need to create some room on the blue line, Huss, in order to make room for guys as it is in terms of trying to get upgrades. So I do
the blue line conversation, which dominated last summer, is sort of taken a back seat right now, but
it's only a brief back seat. Yes,
it's still there. And in fact, it might be even more problematic just when it comes to now even more players coming through the Moose that you don't want to lose for nothing are no longer waivers exempt. So I would say this, and it's June 1st right now. I think this is going to be the most interesting and in a lot of ways maybe pivotal month that we've seen from a player personnel and move from like a management perspective, really since this team got here 12 years ago.
Yeah, bang on, Huss, and I couldn't agree more. Again, people will say, "Oh, well, you thought that last year." Well, yeah, I did think that there would be seismic change beyond the bench that moves that were being made last summer. They didn't happen, but now there's a new deadline. There are contracts expiring now, whereas last year it was I think an organizational decision that, well, what could this group do with a new voice? And now they have their answer. And now they need to know if either people are going to commit or if you're going to commit to new people, and what the other domino effect for the players on the Jets roster is after those three trades are conceivably made. Now that could stretch the discussion into another area where I've been very resistant on in terms of the rebuild process, rather than a team that's still competitive. One of the biggest things that I think, Huss, I think the Jets need to become, I'm not saying abandon skill, I think they need to become more of a blue-collar team. You obviously have to have skill to compete at this level, but to me, they need to take on the personality of the community again. People will say 2015, the Jets got swept, they didn't have enough skill, all those things. It's accurate, but they got too far away from that, and now they got to kind of meet in the middle a little bit for me. That's where the Jets can become a team that is still skilled, but also raises the competition level and the competitiveness level. And that will allow them to compete, provided they have a stabilizing system in terms of, willingness to check and have a goaltender that can play at a high level. I mean, this is the other thing. We've only kind of known two things. We've only kind of known, Andre Pavlik, and you've only kind of known Connor Hellebuyck, right? So you got to find somewhere
the yin and the yang
a little bit, right? I mean, and Pavlik played hard here. Like, no one's taking that away from him. But
he had a couple incredible runs, but overall, I mean, Hellebuyck is just on an entirely different level, and has in fact kind of spoiled us, spoiled the team for the last number of years with just how much of a rock that he's been. And I mean, you are right. I mean, if they do move on from Connor Hellebuyck, I mean, to me, you can say you don't want to rebuild. You can say whatever you want publicly. If you're doing that, you basically, by definition, in some ways are rebuilding, because you're losing your franchise player, and the foundation for everything that you've done for the better part of this contending window, if you want to call it that, isn't there anymore. And that, to me, changes the equation pretty much from top to bottom.
For sure, but it's similar to what we said about Verhaeghe. There's probably a goalie out there who, in the right system and in the right environment, might be ready to spread his wings in a way that Connor Hellebuyck was able to do here. Like we watched, during the one game in the Milwaukee series, Askarov is ready to play in the NHL.
Yeah, he's good to go.
Is he going to be playing behind UC Saros and only getting 25 starts next year, or might the Predators consider a rebuild of their own and be willing to hand the keys over to their first round pick? I'm not saying that they are, and I'm not saying that they should. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is I wonder if there is another situation like that around the league. I don't expect the Jets and Predators to be a trade partner, if you will. But I do wonder about how many more of those under the radar goalies, whether it's in the American League or anywhere else around, whether it's college or a European league, or is there somebody knocking on the door that also could step in and do a job, or a backup? Linus Ullmark, not a lot of people knew much about Linus Ullmark before he went to the Boston Bruins, right? As a Buffalo Sabre, he was a pretty mediocre goalie and sometimes below average. But what he ended up doing was becoming a a Vezina Trophy finalist and likely winner. So, or is there, who's the next Jeremy Swayman, the guy who's starting 35 games, 40 games, but is ready to start 55? You know, it's the crazy thing, like just tying it back together, you know.
Maybe it's Jeremy Swayman.
Well, there you go, restricted free agent, and that exactly. I mean, that's a possibility for sure. And the other reason too, Huss, I mean, just to kind of tie it back to original discussion about the Stanley Cup final, like people are going to say, well, how is Vegas going to beat Bob? Well, Vegas has already knocked out Connor Hellebuyck and Jake Ottinger. That would be how they beat Bob, by using the same formula they used to knock out 2 of the top 5 goalies in the National Hockey League. Right.
I think they're pretty confident going into this one.
Oh, no, for sure. And I'm just saying, like, we always think, oh, this guy's unhittable or he's unstoppable or you can't penetrate him. Well, you know, when you have a really good team, you find a way, you know, whether that's banking it off someone's behind or getting to the net, or, you know, sometimes it's going to be your fourth liner. But, you know, like I said, it's a fascinating time on a lot of levels. We know that there are people that want these decisions to have been made 5 weeks ago, Huss. I mean, this is the way it goes. This is what we always remind people also, Huss, when we have these discussions. Sure, 2 years ago, sure. But when a team is eliminated in the month of April, it is a heck of a long time before the next game gets played in and around October 10th. Okay? It gives us lots to talk about. There is time for these decisions to get made, as big as they are, as surprising as sometimes they may be. But ultimately, those decisions get made, and then the beauty of it is the next season begins, right? So I think it's a critical time. Like I said, I could not agree with you more. This next 12 months is not only going to, you know, may not only define the direction the Jets go, it could be the defining moments of Kevin Cheveldayoff's tenure as general manager, you know, good, bad, or indifferent. Like, this is probably the most critical 1 month or 6 week, if you want to, let's call it a 5 week span going through free agency. And we know the Jets have not been a big ticket item on the free agent market. But the circumstances are changing, Huss. So when the circumstances change, sometimes your approach has to change, right? So, you know, and we know this is not a time to, you know, this is not a pat your back situation. But Ivan Barbashev seems to have put himself in a pretty good position going into free agency on July 1st. I mean, just saying.
He definitely will. The Gus bus and the Barb bus.
Yeah.
2 buses that has been driven by our friend Ken Wiebe. And hey, just to wrap it up, you mentioned, you know, the Panthers and Knights are going to be going at it, and the champions are going to have to find a way. It's pretty clear that with a lot of challenges, Kevin Cheveldayoff is going to need to find a way to navigate through this month initially, and then the rest of the offseason. And there's lots to do and lots for us to talk about.